a memorial service to them right here in Pensacola. My next step is to find out why they would do that. Was it just a national thing, or was there somebody from Pensacola who was in the 10th Cavalry? But we end up missing things like this. We end up missing businesses that were here. So we have the Florida Sentinel Brother Matthew Louis came down from Massachusetts and was a lawyer turned teacher turned publisher, and started the Florida Sentinel in north central Florida, and then was about to close and met this white brother who encouraged him to come to Pensacola, and so he kept it here in Pensacola and had this gorgeous building down on, I just forgot the cross streets there, Chase and Balin. This was right there on Chase and Balin. This was his staff here. When he closed or moved the Florida Sentinel because his wife got sick and he was having some financial problems, he moved and went back to Jacksonville. Then the editors, a couple of the editors from here started the Colored Citizen, and it remained from 1913, this is the first official copy in 1914, up till the 1950s. So when we don't have this visual conversation, we end up leaving out stuff like this. We end up leaving out that we had at least 2 black banks here. This is ooh, I love that look on y'all. Y'all going, what? I know. That's why y'all here. In 1891, it was one earlier than that. I'm still trying to find the documentation on it. I've seen a listing of it. I'm still trying to find some documentation on it. We actually have this one because John Sunday sued the bank because they weren't having their board meeting. So he had to file this in the court. So we actually have this copy of one of the certificates that he bought. But this loan association was filed with the Feds, was filed with the Feds as a bank, and they took deposits and loan money for building houses and businesses. We end up missing things like this in our conversation. We end up missing that black folks invested in the land here. So how many of you know about Wingate Beach? Okay. Okay. So Wingate Beach, the property, you may know that it was in the 1950s that they started, and then went up through, I forget which hurricane destroyed some of the land. It was going down before then, but it was there for a few decades. But in 1881, this deed shows that John Wingate, that Aaron Wingate, John Wingate's father, actually bought the acreage. I think almost like 40 acres, over 100 acres. It was like two different transactions. But then they put an ad there that Wingate Beach is open, and here is a picture showing that people were right there at Wingate. Wingate Beach is out Perdido, going out Perdido. We end up missing these kind of stories. So this is a guy, William Trimmer, and if you're done Civil War history, you may have seen some of his writing. I call him an author because his work has been published in other books. William Trimmer came over here from Apalachicola, settled in Molino, and started buying land, had been a Confederate soldier, started buying land, and bought this woman with him, Paulina Beard, his servant. And I use that in servant because you got it, yeah. He ends up leaving this servant his land, and so I think she was a little bit more than a servant. And since I got chillins up here, that's all I'm gonna say. And so this land, this Confederate soldier ends up leaving this sister. We end up losing stories like that when we don't talk about how land is moved around and invested and passed on. We end up losing stories like that. We end up losing stories about people of color. Aurora Wills is here. Y'all heard she was the editor of Images in Black and When Black Folks was colored. So the When Black Folks was colored is the reason I'm talking about it, because black folks and other folks were called people of color. And so sometimes we don't know what the color is to that. But Euphrosyne Hennard is one of those who came over and said she was Creole, white father and a person of color mother, so we don't know what that means, but she owned slaves. And it was said that she owned, they said that she owned the brick deal out Scenic Highways, you know where the chimney is? The brick deal that's back there, that at one time she was the owner of that. Excuse me. That she bought and sold slaves. And so I was thinking, ooh, okay, now that's interesting. And so in looking at a thesis from a brother from Rice University, it talks, well, you can't see it there now, sorry about that, but this thesis right here, it talks about her lineage. So I pulled the property records, and she would buy slaves and then set them free. But now she held them for a couple of years, so I think she got a work out of it. But I'm just saying, she bought and sold, and she bought slaves and set them free. That's the kind of story we end up missing, because we don't have it. So I know somebody's going to walk over and Robin said black folks own slaves. Well, they did. And so that's not the whole story, though. So to me, it's not right if a black person does. It's not right if a Creole person does it. Is black and Creole the same? The Creole in here gonna mess me over for saying that. It's not right if a white person owns it. So, but it's an interesting story, and that's a story. That's a conversation that we don't have when we don't talk about the images and don't talk about the inclusion and settle in on having conversations around the dinner table that are racist. And finally, we don't have conversations like this. So this was a group of ministers, clergy, business people, housewives, business women who came together and said, we need to take care of the destitute women and children in our community. And so they built 2 houses on East Street right across from Fricker Center. This is in 1910 they started doing this. Built 2 houses right there, and was the colored home for orphans, for widows and orphans. Raised money, and I think this is a note. This says here, this was in the Freeman in 1911. On Labor Day, 2 of the fastest teams in the city crossed bats at Lincoln Park for the benefit of the colored widows and orphans home, which will soon be erected on the West Hill. Well, and this is Walker Thomas who's saying this, who was kind of like the Rhoda Bear of Pensacola. Is that the way they say it? Yeah. He's the gossip guy. He says, well, I suppose there is some excuse for the attendance being so small, yet it was due to there being another game in another part of the city. Why can't we help our poor just like the white people? The Cubs defeated the Furniture Porters by a score of 5-4. It was a classy game, too. How do you have a classy baseball game? I have no idea. But anyway, he's right, and so it's true, right? But you end up missing stories like this when we don't have that conversation. And finally, we end up missing the whole of the education conversation. So here is the building of, Robin, Lord have mercy, right on Cervantes Street. John, where the Head Start program is. Oh my Lord, I just forgot the name of the school.
Gibson.
Gibson, thank you, John A. Gibson, thank you. This was in 1922, I believe. This is the building of John A. Gibson, which was the middle school. Here you see J. Lee Pickens School, Booker T. Washington School, and information, the Wildcats, 1945, 1938. This is really interesting. This is Alice Williams, who was here. Many of you may know the Alice Williams School, and the library, the first African-American library, and only, okay, hush up, Rob. Library was named after her. Interestingly, and then finally, this was outside of John A. Gibson. So let me just stick a fork right here. Pensacola, and I'm going to get some dates wrong, but when Carnegie was offering to build the libraries for free, I'll build you the library, you just take care of it. Who knows the story? Yeah, Carnegie said, I'll build you the library, you just take care of it. Pensacola and 2 or 3 other cities in Florida said, no, we won't do it, because Carnegie's deal was everybody can use a library. So Pensacola didn't have a public library for decades because of that. So we had a couple of private libraries, but we just didn't want to give up the ghost. I don't know what ghost that was, but ooh. Okay. I'm gonna go back at the end, thank you. I need something to make y'all happy. So that goes to the conversation, why do I say that we're racist at home and revolutionary in the street? What is our heart saying that is not equipping our head to make this right? What is our head saying that's not reaching that's messing our hearts up? What are we saying around the dinner table that's just crazy? Which is what I call racism, sexism, ageism, any of ism. It's just crazyism. So I want you to watch this for me.